Here was a question that came up in the course of the last video in the discussion. Did Ellen White like oysters? Well, she was from Portland, Maine, so what do you think? Yeah, she ate oysters at one point in her life, and we have some evidence that even as late as 1882 that she ate some oysters. Let's take a look at the evidence. In 1882, Ellen White wrote her daughter-in-law,
Mary, if you can get me a good box of herrings, fresh ones, please do so. These last ones that Willie got are bitter and old. If you can buy cans, say a half-dozen cans of good tomatoes, please do so. We shall need them. If you can get a few cans of good oysters, get them.
but I thought Seventh-day Adventists by 1880s had already given up all of the foods that are in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. Well, not quite that simple. Let's take a look. W.H. Littlejohn, president of Battle Creek College, wrote in a question and answer column in 1883,
It is difficult to decide with certainty whether oysters would properly come under the prohibition of Leviticus 11 verses 9 to 12. It would, however, seem from the language as if they might.
So it wasn't exactly a settled matter among Adventists. He says it might. They're still debating the issue, and we'll see some further evidence as we go on that it had not become yet settled. But then there's another matter that comes up. There's a testimony that was written many years later that seemed to call this into question. Fanny Bolton claimed she saw Ellen White at a railroad depot restaurant eat
big white raw oysters with vinegar, pepper, and salt. I was overwhelmed with this inconsistency and dumb with horror. Elder Starr hurried me out and made all sorts of excuses and justifications of Sister White's action, yet I kept thinking in my heart, what does it mean? What has God said? How does she dare eat these abominations?
So who was Fanny Bolton? What was her relationship with Ellen White and her relationship to Elder Starr that she mentioned? We get a little background on her from the Ellen White biographies, Volume 4. Fanny, or Frances Eugenia Bolton, had been invited to join Ellen White's staff in 1887. The daughter of a Methodist minister, Fanny was brought into the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Chicago through the evangelistic efforts of G.B. Starr and his wife. At the time, she was a correspondent for the Chicago Daily Inter-Ocean. She received her literary training at the Ladies' Seminary at Evanston, Illinois. So Starr and others gave her a hearty recommendation for work on Ellen White's staff, and although she was just barely acquainted with Ellen White and W.C. White, she was employed upon Ellen White's return from Europe. She was to fit in where needed, but her work was to be largely in preparing Ellen White's materials in article form for the Review and Herald, Signs of the Times, and the Youth's Instructor. W.C. White reported that Fanny proved to be brilliant and entertaining, and although somewhat erratic at times, was loved by the other members of the family. Fanny worked for Ellen White for a number of years, although she wasn't totally happy with the arrangement. She was a writer of her own ability, and she had published before she worked for her, and some during the time. Her poems, some appear in the Review and Herald and other periodicals, one even in Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing. It's still there today. She wrote even a hymn. So the anonymity was difficult for her, and eventually she complained to others about it. It was just the standard work for an editor. As I've said on other occasions, of all the books that I have edited, my name may appear in only one of them as editor. It's a rare thing. So she finally gave up working for Ellen White after Ellen White brought her back on several times. When Elder Starr heard about this letter and the statement that Fanny had made, he wrote a response, which is recorded in a letter to W.C. White. That's Ellen's son.
I can only say that I regard it as the most absurdly untruthful lot of rubbish that I have ever seen or read regarding our dear Sister White. The event simply never occurred. I never saw your mother eat oysters or meat of any kind, either in a restaurant or at her own table. Fanny Bolton's statement, is a lie of the first order. I never had such an experience, and it is too absurd for anyone who ever knew your mother to believe.
But of course, some do believe it because Ellen White at one time did eat oysters. Well, there's some more evidence that I just came across and that I want to add this in. It came coincidentally in connection with another video that is on YouTube, and let me show it to you. The video pointed to a book entitled Breakfast, Dinner, and Supper, mostly a cookbook with instructions on hygiene and how to cook and so on. And it was written and edited by J.E. White, M.D., and Mrs. M.L. Wanless. And it was this part, the M.D., that was called into question in the video. Was he actually an M.D.? Well, okay, here's some evidence that was sent to him when he requested information from Loma Linda University. James Edson White did attend and graduated from a medical college. This was news to me. And it goes into the details about it. So Edson was a credentialed doctor, although we don't see him practicing it. And it seems strange to us today because to become a doctor requires many years of study and then residency and a number of other things that wasn't required in that day. And many practicing physicians just took a short course and then apprenticed under somebody or just set up practice. I've looked at a number of individuals who call themselves a doctor with far less credibility. So this may seem strange, but he actually had the credentials for it. Now, so what about this book? What's in this book? And was it something that was widely accepted by Adventists? Well, let's look at that evidence too. I searched the Adventist Digital Library for the title of the book, Breakfast, Dinner, and Supper, and also for J.E. White, M.D., and I found this advertisement. It ran for several issues in the Pacific Health Journal and Temperance Advocate, which is an Adventist publication. And notice some of the things that are said about it. It gives his full credentials, as you can see in the picture, and an invaluable book for the study, the library, and the fireside. It would seem then that the medical institutions of the day, among Adventists, accepted it as a good book. Notice this recommendation on the same ad. This is from Elder Littlejohn that we quoted before.
He who is well fed and well behaved is favorably circumstanced to enjoy life himself and prove helpful to others. The work entitled Breakfast, Dinner, and Supper, therefore, is worthy of a place in every library.
Incidentally, the book is still available. You can buy it on Amazon. So let's look inside. Turn to page 348. We'll zoom in just a little bit here. And notice a section on shellfish, stewed oysters, fried oysters, clam chowder, fried clams, clam chowder. Look at that. I wouldn't have expected that, but apparently this was acceptable at that time. Curious, isn't it? Let's go back to that original advertisement in the periodical. And I happened to turn the page just to the page before, and I noticed this article that was very clear about one aspect of prohibitions. So here's an article entitled Scavengers Not Food. Swine are scavengers. Swine. It's just pretty clear what it's talking about here. And at the end of the article, it has this interesting little thing. The old doctor says that lard is aptly called shortening because it shortens life. So they were pretty clear as it had to do with swine's flesh. So what are we to conclude? In a previous video, I talked about how Seventh-day Adventists came to understand the issues of health and how that at one point Ellen White said that if God didn't want us to use swine's flesh, that he would reveal it to more than one or two. And gradually that came to be. And once it was understood that it was improving the health of Adventists to avoid using it, they made it a general issue. And now there was a developing aspect of understanding what things are not good. They had already given up tobacco and alcohol and now pork, and now they were looking at this matter of the rest of the things that are listed in Leviticus, and that they too were in some way deficient. There's no question, but there is some nutrition in oysters, but at the same time, they are bottom feeders and filters, and as a result, they tend to accumulate a lot of the poisons in the oceans, and so certainly would not be the best of things for us to eat. Anyway, the answer is yeah, at one time she did eat oysters, and then she gave them up, and she became more clearly a promoter of the vegetarian diet, particularly after her time in Australia when she made it a firm decision to become a vegetarian. She wasn't as rigid about it as some people might assume, as a lot of the people that followed her did, because she was actually not a vegan. She did use some dairy in her diet, but of course, animals were healthier at the time, and she said as time goes on, the animals will become less and less healthy. Those are things that we should consider. Each of us in our own stage of development and taking care of this body temple that God says belongs to the Holy Spirit. Thought that was going to be shorter, but as I found more information, I thought you'd want to see that too. Thanks for joining us today. God bless.
To keep up with the latest in this series, be sure to subscribe to this channel.